Imagine this: you're at home, minding your own business, when suddenly a group of enforcers shows up at your doorstep with a court order. Your family is being evicted. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to us. But what makes this story different is the woman standing beside me, my wife, a Marine Corps sniper instructor. You see, when the HOA decided to target us, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they could push us around, but they didn't count on the fierce determination of a Marine. As they came at us with their demands and threats, my wife wasn't about to back down. This isn't just about a simple eviction notice. It's about standing up to power, fighting for your home, and doing whatever it takes to protect your family. But what happened next? How did we go from being threatened with eviction to taking on the HOA in ways they never saw coming? Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and you won't believe what happened when the enforcers met someone who had the skills to fight back in ways they never expected. Trust me, you're going to want to hear the rest. To understand what led to this moment, we need to rewind a bit. We moved into this neighborhood years ago, full of hope for a peaceful, quiet life. At first, everything seemed perfect. The HOA was just a formality, one of those things you sign up for when you want to live in a community that looks nice and neat. But soon things took a strange turn. We started getting warnings for the smallest things: a flag flying too high, a tree that was just a little too big, a patch of grass that wasn't quite up to their standards. The notices kept piling up, all backed by fines and threats. At first, we tried to be reasonable, reaching out to the HOA with polite requests, asking for clarification. But each time, the responses were colder, more dismissive. They acted like they had all the power, and we were just supposed to fall in line. Then came the final straw, a letter that stated we were in violation of some obscure rule about our driveway. It didn't make sense, and it felt personal. The way they worded it was almost like they were pushing us out. That's when we decided enough was enough. But what the HOA didn't know was that messing with my family, especially my wife, would not end like they imagined. They had just unleashed something they weren't ready to deal with. The day we received that final eviction notice, it felt like everything we had worked for was slipping through our fingers. The HOA wasn't just going after our home, they were trying to break us. As soon as I read the letter, I could feel my blood start to boil. They'd ignored every reasonable attempt we'd made to resolve things. But now they were taking it to another level, sending enforcers to our door like we were criminals. We weren't the only ones they'd targeted, either. Over the months, whispers had spread about other families in the neighborhood being fined for ridiculous things. One couple got a warning for having a flower bed that wasn't up to code, and another family had their security camera system flagged because it was too visible. It was clear that the HOA wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. They were just using their power to control everything and everyone. It felt like we were fighting a losing battle, but my wife was different. My wife, the Marine Corps sniper instructor, wasn't the type to just sit back and let people walk all over us. She'd have faced far greater challenges than this in her career, things that had tested her mind and body to the limit. But when it came to our home, her protective instincts were off the charts. She started strategizing, breaking down every detail of the HOA's actions and looking for any legal loopholes she could exploit. She wasn't going to let them win without a fight. As the days passed, things escalated. The HOA wasn't backing down, and neither were we. We began gathering evidence, talking to other residents who had been bullied by the association. The more we learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about us. It was about the community as a whole. The HOA had overstepped, and it was time for someone to stand up to them. But with each move we made, the tension grew. Every phone call felt like it could be the one that sent things spiraling. The enforcers, they weren't just workers. They were like dogs on a leash, doing the bidding of the HOA. But it was clear that even they were uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. Some of them hesitated when they showed up at our door, unsure of the situation they were walking into. That hesitation gave us a small advantage, but it wasn't enough to stop the pressure from mounting. At the same time, I started wondering, what would this cost us? My wife had the skills to outsmart them, but could we outlast them? The HOA wasn't known for backing down easily, and now, it wasn't just about the rules anymore, it was about sending a message. And that message was loud and clear. If you cross them, there will be consequences. But we weren't about to let fear drive us into submission. We dug deeper, talking to lawyers, speaking with neighbors who had been wronged. We started forming alliances, trying to unite against the overreach that was suffocating the entire community. The question lingered in the back of my mind, though, could we make a stand against an organization this powerful, or were we just setting ourselves up for an even bigger battle? With every new piece of information, the stakes got higher. The clock was ticking, and I knew that if we didn't act fast, the HOA would move to destroy everything we had built. The tension was unbearable, but the more we dug into their operations, the more I realized this wasn't just about a few bad rules. It was about something bigger, something that threatened the entire neighborhood, and we were the ones who had to stop it. But how? And what would happen when the HOA realized we weren't going to back down? The days felt like they were dragging on, each one bringing a new layer of pressure. The HOA kept sending more threats, more demands, while we scrambled to gather the support we needed. My wife, always the calm in the storm, was laser-focused on the legal side of things, but even she could feel the weight of what was coming. Every phone call from the HOA was like a ticking clock, counting down to something we weren't sure we could stop. We could sense that they were gearing up for something big, and with every passing day, it became harder to ignore the reality. This wasn't just a paperwork fight anymore. The stakes were real, and they were rising fast. The tension started to spread through the neighborhood. People who had once stayed silent were now coming forward, but the fear in their voices was palpable. Some of them were afraid of retaliation, fines, or worse, eviction like us. Others, though, were fed up, just like we were. We were starting to see more and more of the neighbors rallying behind us, whispering about joining forces, but it wasn't enough yet. The HOA had power, more than we realized. They had connections, resources, and they were relentless. It wasn't just our house they wanted, it was about asserting dominance over the whole community. One evening, as I was finishing dinner, I got a call from one of the enforcers. His voice was low, almost apologetic. He said they were coming. The HOA had sent a team to make good on their final notice. This time, they were bringing the big guns, their top lawyers and security. They weren't just coming to knock on our door. They were coming to make an example out of us, to send a message to anyone else who dared question their power. I could feel my stomach drop. It was now or never. I told my wife, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something different in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. We had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was finally here. I knew she was ready, but the thought of everything we had to lose made my heart race. We weren't just fighting for our home anymore. We were fighting for something much bigger. The right to live without fear of being bullied by an overreaching organization. As the hours passed, our living room filled with papers, evidence of the HOA's corruption, and the strategy we would follow. We were doing everything we could to prepare, but I could sense the clock ticking louder with every second. The enforcers were on their way, and I knew that when they arrived, there was no turning back. It would either end in our defeat, or we would finally be able to take a stand that would change everything. The whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. I could feel the weight of the eyes on us, and it made the tension even worse. The HOA had underestimated us, but would it be enough? Could we really go toe-to-toe with them and win? My wife was already in military mode, calculating every detail, preparing for the showdown that would decide our future. But I could tell that even she was bracing herself for something we hadn't anticipated. There was a new energy in the air, a feeling that something was about to break wide open. The whole situation felt like it was teetering on the edge. We were standing at the brink of a battle that could change everything, and there was no way of knowing who would come out on top. I just hoped we were ready, because when the HOA showed up, we had to be ready to face them head-on. There could be no backing down now. It wasn't just the enforcers at the door. Standing alongside them was someone we hadn't expected, one of our own neighbors. This wasn't just any neighbor. It was the one person we had been trusting in our fight, someone who had been helping us gather evidence, attend meetings, and strategize our next move. And now, there they were, standing with the very people we had been fighting against. It hit me like a ton of bricks. We had been betrayed. My wife's eyes locked on them instantly, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. But before she could say anything, the enforcer with the clipboard stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We're here to enforce the HOA's decision," he said, like it was just another routine visit. But I knew there was more behind his words. This wasn't just about the eviction anymore. It was about control, about making sure we stayed in line. The fact that one of our own neighbors was helping them. That was a game changer. It took everything in me not to explode right then and there. The betrayal stung, but I knew we had to stay calm, stay focused. The last thing we needed was to give them a reason to escalate things further. But I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that we were being played. The HOA wasn't just a faceless corporation anymore. They had infiltrated our very community, using someone we trusted to take us down from the inside. This plot twist changed everything. Now, not only were we fighting the HOA, but we were up against someone who knew all our strategies, all our weaknesses. The stakes were higher than ever. What had started as a simple eviction had turned into a battle for the soul of our neighborhood. How could we stand up against an enemy that had already gained a foothold within our ranks? As the enforcers moved closer, I could hear the heavy silence in the air, thick with tension. My wife's hand tightened around the doorframe, her eyes scanning every movement. There was no doubt in her mind. This was the moment we had to outsmart them, or everything would be lost. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I noticed something else. The neighbor who had betrayed us wasn't just standing there with a look of resolve. They looked almost nervous. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Why was he so jittery? Was he having second thoughts? We had a window, but I couldn't figure out what to do with it. We couldn't afford to hesitate. The clock was ticking, and we had to make a move before the HOA took everything we had. The betrayal left a bitter taste in my mouth, but it also fueled a new fire. This fight wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about survival, and I wasn't about to let them win, not like this. With everything on the line, we had to keep moving forward, and somehow, someway, we had to turn this betrayal into our advantage. The real battle wasn't just outside our door, it was brewing within the walls of our own community. The enforcers were here, the clock was ticking, and it was anyone's game. But there was one thing I knew for sure: things were about to get a lot more complicated. The moment felt like it stretched on forever. There we stood, facing the enforcers and our betrayer, the tension so thick I could practically taste it. My wife's eyes never left the neighbor who had turned on us, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew what was at stake. I glanced over at the enforcers, who were starting to look a little more uncomfortable, unsure of how to proceed. My wife wasn't backing down, and neither was I. "Do you really want to do this?" I asked the neighbor, my voice steady despite the chaos brewing in my chest. He didn't answer at first, his gaze flickering between the enforcers and us. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I didn't have a choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper.